good, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to another spooky video. In today's video, I'm going to be covering the real life Candyman. This is a story about a man that actually poisoned and killed his own son on Halloween Day. And the truth behind it all will not only terrify you, but will make you think twice about eating the candy that's handed out on Halloween. Make sure you guys grab a drink, grab a snack, and let's get right into the video. I kind of like that intro. Yeah, make it open to Shane Dawson. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So, Ronald Clark O'Brien was born on October 19th in 1944. He lived in Deer Park, Texas, and he was married to a woman named Deneen, and they had 2 children together, 8-year-old Timothy and 5-year-old Elizabeth. A little bit about Ronald and just like his way of life, okay? Ronald was actually an optometrist, which is, you know, like an eye doctor. He was in charge of the local bus program, and he was also a deacon at the Second Baptist Church that he went to. His acquaintances and just people in the community say that he was an amazing person and an extraordinary father. Let's fast forward a little bit, okay? The day is October 31st, 1974, which is Halloween Day. And since it was Halloween Day, Ronald and his neighbor Jimmy decided to take their kids trick-or-treating together. They had been out trick-or-treating for a little bit and everything was going fine and dandy. But we all know the like unspoken rule of like the porch light, right? Like if the porch light is on, or you know, some type of light is on at the front of the house, they got some candy, you know what I mean? But if it's off, you know, that kind of basically signals to the trick-or-treaters that there's nobody home or that they're not handing out candy, you know? The kids ran up to a house that had the porch lights off. They rang the doorbell. Nobody answered, so they ran off to the next house, leaving both Ronald and Jimmy a little bit behind. That's typically not like a weird thing. I know when I used to go trick-or-treating with my mom when I was younger, I would kind of run like a house ahead and she would kind of just be like following me behind. So it wasn't like very weird for the kids to just like run ahead a house or 2, you know what I mean? As long as like the parent was still, you know, in a close distance from the kids just to make sure that they were safe. And you guys have to remember that this is back in 1974, so, you know, times were slightly different than they are now. Now, Ronald, being the extraordinary dad that he was, went up to this house with the porch lights off that the kids had just went to, and he saw that there was some of those jumbo pixie sticks laid out, and he took some for the kids. Ronald gave a pixie stick to each one of his kids as well as Jimmy's kids, and he actually gave a pixie stick to a boy that went to his church that he knew. A little bit after Ronald gave the kids the pixie sticks, it started to rain, and they all decided that it would be best to just go home and cut trick-or-treating short for the night. Once Timothy, Elizabeth, and Ronald got back home, Deneen decided to go out and visit one of her friends since, you know, her family was back at home and they were safe and sound. Because Halloween was actually on a school night this year, Ronald allowed Timothy and Elizabeth to have one piece of candy before bed, and Timothy chose to have the jumbo pixie stick. Once Timothy had his pixie stick, he kind of mentioned that it was a little bitter and kind of gross. So Ronald gave him a glass of Kool-Aid just to like wash it down and, you know, get like whatever gross taste was left in his mouth out. Soon after Timothy had the pixie stick, he actually started to throw up and even started convulsing. Of course, seeing that his child is convulsing and throwing up, Ronald called an ambulance and they took Timothy to the hospital, but unfortunately, Timothy passed away within an hour of eating the pixie stick. Of course, doctors do their job and they realized that Timothy had been poisoned with something. So the doctor that was in charge of Timothy called the morgue and asked what Timothy's breath smelled like. The morgue got back to the doctor and let him know that Timothy's breath smelled like almonds. And if you guys didn't know, which I actually didn't know before I did like the research for this, cyanide makes your breath smell like almonds. So instantly the doctor knew that the reason Timothy had passed away was because of cyanide poisoning. The pathologist actually said that Timothy consumed enough cyanide to kill not one, but two adults. Two adults, okay? This was an 8-year-old child. Of course, an investigation was instantly in effect because there is a poisoned child that just passed away with a large amount of cyanide. And they came to the conclusion that the first 2 inches of that jumbo pixie stick had been packed with the cyanide. So immediately the other parents were notified of these pixie sticks that poisoned Timothy and killed him. And one of the kids that received one of the jumbo pixie sticks was actually found asleep in his bed with the stick still in his hand, unopened. Fortunately for that kid, he wasn't strong enough to open the pixie stick and, you know, wasn't able to eat it. So that was good. And the rest of the pixie sticks were retrieved. The police wanted to figure out who the hell was giving out these poisoned pixie sticks. So Ronald, being, you know, an incredible person, he agreed to work with the police and show them what house it was where he got these pixie sticks from. But once they got to the neighborhood where they went trick-or-treating, Ronald couldn't necessarily point out what house it was where he got the pixie sticks from. The only thing that Ronald was able to recall from the house was that it was dark. No shit. And that the only thing that he saw was a hairy arm that reached out through a little crack in the door to hand him the pixie sticks. People are really bad liars. A little bit of time was going by and Ronald still could not point out what house it was where he got the candy from. And police were starting to get a little annoyed with Ronald, and so they were really pressuring him into just trying to figure out what house it was because they needed to get to the bottom of this. And after walking around the neighborhood for a little bit, Ronald was finally able to point out the house. A man named Courtney Melvin lived in the house that Ronald pointed out, that handed out the poisoned candy. And Courtney Melvin was actually an air traffic controller. It wasn't very hard to find where Courtney Melvin worked, and they immediately went to the airport where he was working at and arrested him right on the spot. Once they had Mr. Melvin in custody, of course they questioned him, but he had a great alibi, okay? He said that he had actually been working on Halloween night and all of his colleagues were able to vouch for him, and of course, I mean, work records, they show that he was there. The only people that were at Mr. Melvin's house on Halloween were his wife and daughter, and they had actually handed out candy earlier in the night, but they ran out, so they just decided to turn off the porch light so that, you know, people knew that there wasn't any more candy there. Because Mr. Melvin had a very great alibi as to where he was on Halloween night, police started to kind of suspect Ronald, okay? And they really started looking into his background and just his past, and they discovered that Ronald was actually $100,000 in debt. You guys have to remember that this is, again, back in 1974. So, okay, yeah, $100,000 now is still a lot of money, but back then it was even worth more money. Ronald had actually tried to sell his house prior to all this happening to try and pay off some of the debt that he owed. And they actually found out that Ronald couldn't hold down a job, okay? He had several jobs within the past couple of years and just could not manage to hold a steady income. In the fall of 1974, at his last job, he actually got fired for theft. And a little bit before Halloween, he actually took out life insurances on both of his kids. They questioned his wife, Deneen, about all of this, and she had no idea that Ronald had done any of this. And the very next morning after Timothy passed away, so on November 1st, Ronald had actually called the life insurance place to ask about the payout. Police went ahead and they got a warrant so that they could search all of Ronald's property. They found a few things, okay? One of them was a pocket knife with residue from the sugary powder, so from like the pixie stick. And they also found scissors with some of the remaining plastic from the pixie stick. So you just, bad liar, bad father, bad at covering his tracks, just all around bad person. Police started to look more and more into Ronald's life, okay? And because he was an optometrist, he was actually taking some chemistry classes. And they were able to find out that during his classes, he would ask weird questions to his professor, like, what's the strongest substance to kill a person? Or how much of a certain substance would you need to kill a person? And he also had called a friend that worked at a chemical plant. He was trying to get cyanide from this friend that worked at the chemical plant, but the lowest amount of cyanide that he could buy was 5 pounds of it. His acquaintances also mentioned that Ronald was actually making weird comments, mentioning that all of his financial struggles were soon going to come to an end. And on November 5th, he was finally arrested with the murder of his son. And what's even crazier about this, you guys, is that the whole time he was on trial, he claimed he was innocent. His trial started on May 5th, 1975, and on June 3rd, 1975, his trial ended with the jury delegating for only 46 minutes. They convicted him of 4 counts of attempted murder and 1 count of capital murder. And an hour after the jury gave their verdict, he was actually sentenced to death by electric chair. Shortly after his sentencing, Deneen filed for divorce, and she actually testified against him in court, and her daughter packed their things and they never turned back or saw Ronald again. And on March 31st, 1984, he was actually sentenced to death by lethal injection instead of electric chair, because by this time, the Supreme Court had ruled that death by electric chair was like a cruel punishment. His last meal consisted of a well-done steak and a Boston cream pie. Watchers that were there to like watch his execution, take place, they actually held up signs and threw candy at him while screaming trick or treat. His eyes were actually donated for research purposes as well as for cataract replacement. So, he wasn't a complete waste of a human. He wasn't executed until about like 10 years after Timothy's death, like 9 and a couple of months. So I'm glad that at least little Timothy got, some justice for his father's stupidity. That's going to be it for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you guys so much for watching. And, maybe this Halloween when you guys are all going out trick-or-treating, or you guys are taking your kids, your nieces, whatever it is, be careful, because you just never know people's true intentions. I hope you guys have an amazing rest of your day, and the best rest of your week. Don't forget to drink some water. Make sure you guys eat, smoke it up, live it up, fuck it up. Make sure that you guys subscribe down below so that you guys don't miss out on any future spooky content from moi, or just any future content from me, okay? Have an amazing Halloween. Be safe, watch your surroundings, and do not trust a single soul. I'll see you guys very soon for another video. Bye guys!